Volume 6 C44. Gustav found it very hard to believe the message that he received days before. Indeed, it seemed almost impossible, but then the more he thought about it, the more that seems like something Astraka would have done. Hell, it's almost the same thing as he's already done once before. So he launched a tentative general assault on multiple positions, and found soldiers made of straw and only a handful of real soldiers, a mere fragment of the whole army. They could have held out for weeks, maybe months with what they had on hand. Gustav thought and cursed himself. His soldiers thought him a military genius who had won 3 battles in a row. They felt invincible. But after days on the march since then, I only feel like a fool chasing a ghost. Every time I think I'm going to win, he's tricked me. He has fewer quality soldiers, almost no paladins, just militia and household soldiers, but so far he's taken part, delayed me by I don't even know how long, killed almost all my scouts. I look like I'm winning, but feel like I'm losing, and I'm chasing this bastard all the way to Hobens. Gustav's self-recrimination never stopped. But it was hard not to admire his enemy as well. At least he has to take the roundabout ways. I can cut him off. There's no way he's expecting that I'll have caught on to him this soon. That much, Gustav could satisfy himself with. Forced marches over the main highways would give him a massive advantage, letting him cover twice the distance, and for good measure, buying up wagons and horses to race our soldiers ahead didn't hurt either. It made his forces more mobile than ever, and it was this choice that, on his 6th day, brought him his greatest surprise. A messenger. A missive from the Holy Queen. The young boy with the short hair said and rendered a quick salute. He wore the light metal-studded leather armor of a messenger in wartime. His cheeks were flushed, but as he'd ridden in one of the carts, it wasn't from exhaustion. Very young, still nervous. Gustav accepted the message without comment and opened it immediately. On the road to Hobens. Blah blah blah. Things I already. Oh. Gustav read it and skimmed the familiar material before seeing the last. The Holy Queen and the Allfather are going to intercept him. They want to keep him back from the city? It was brave. It was foolish. It was. Just like the Kalka I remember. His eyes misted over briefly. Her devotion to her subjects, it's not gone. Buried under anger, bitterness, and unfortunate pragmatism. But not gone. She wants to keep them safe. The seal was genuine, that much was for sure, and given the last message he received revealed Astraka's deception, he couldn't bring himself to doubt it now. The army marched as hard and fast as they could to catch up to the only place that Astraka could likely be intercepted. A crossroads between multiple locations, it had a few towns, ample supplies, and more importantly, an old road little used anymore that an army could easily use to take itself straight to the main road and then up to the very gates of the capital. Now if only we make it in time. He prayed to the gods, and watched as another wagon raced away with another load of foot soldiers to join the queen. The Roble Holy Kingdom's mightiest military arm was not easily broken, not even by the defeat and possible death of Remedios. Unsurprisingly, it did hesitate. Naya could not hear the sound of mass surrenders or weapons falling from fingers that lost their nerve. She heard only her own voice hissing in pain as the healer held his hand to Naya's chest and the dim blue light began to work as the Cure Wounds spell took away her pain and restored her flesh to itself inside and out. When that was over, she went to the window, ignoring Remedios for the moment and allowing her subordinates to guard and bind her as they saw fit. From that window she could see out over most of the city, and beyond the wall to where the Holy Kingdom army dithered. They were wavering. Unclear. Uncertain. Go on. Give it up. Naya cursed them, begged them with prayers to gods she no longer believed in. She held her hands tightly behind her back and glanced over her shoulder. Alicia, you lead them. My queen. The stone spitter said and left her presence. They are not going to give in. Naya knew it probably before the paladins did, and there is no way they'd just let us leave, not with Remedios. They have to be broken. She wiped a tear of anger from her eye. Her wings trembled at her back. She reached down and scratched an itch on her lower back, near her tailbone. Damn it! She hissed. A short while later, the gates were opening, and her army was marching out. The human army arrayed against the city shouted their answer as one, if you want us as prisoners, come and take us. Naya went to the table and snatched up the horn which sat on the desk, and took flight out of the improvised door she'd made in a fit of temper. Her wings beat at the air and carried her aloft, The little curved horn came up to her lips, and hovering above the city, both armies, and the world itself, she pressed her lips to it and blew. The hidden soldiers were deep in the wood. They would take time to respond, but that's fine. Just fine. It's better if the battle is already joined. The humans hesitated, but it seemed that whoever was in charge decided that it was related only to the army in front of them. The stone spitters began their part first, and human archers did their best to match. The lack of shields was a weakness for the demi-humans, one Naya privately resolved to correct, but they compensated by having those with the thickest hides and largest bodies up front. Ogres could easily handle arrows at that range. Most would barely feel it. Here and there an orc, or a Xian, or a blader, or a stone spitter fell. But the cost was light, and the humans had numbers on their side. Watching from where Naya was, she could feel the flow of battle like it was the flowing of her own blood, the beating of her own heart, the breathing of her own lungs. It was part of her. The commander after Remedios might have had a bold spirit, but arrayed against tens of thousands of demi-humans, his spirit was flagging. The occasional screams came up from both sides, and Naya's beating wings kept her aloft, out of reach, and watching. My bow. I wish I'd thought to bring it. She mentally cursed Remedios again while she waited for one side to break. The drums of the human army went up first, and the pikes snapped down in perfect unison, a wall of steel points. In spite of herself, pride swelled Naya's heart for her former people, her anger, her hatred, her resentment. It melted away under what in that moment was a shining beacon of human potential. The humans began their advance, stepping forward as a unit to use their discipline as they always had, against demi-human indiscipline. Only to receive the shock of their lives after the second drum of the human army, when atop the wall, Naya's own drums beat. Orcs and bladers formed up in tight ranks, long spears of their own ready to use. The various races of her army moved as units, squads, companies, platoons. From above, it was like watching squares shift. Her sense of pride shifted as the two sides began to draw closer. The mounted humans began to charge towards Naya's Bafok and other great running races. The charge was, for the first time in memory, being met by an orthodox countercharge. The clash sent screams of all races upward toward the sky in unison, blood and bone trampled underfoot, horses falling with dying whinnies, and paladins whose training was worth years of investment died before shedding even a drop of blood. Every man or Bafok who believed themselves to be the main character in some grand epic died in an instant of shock or confusion if they were lucky. Or fell screaming, bleeding out and wailing, clutching at severed or shattered limbs. On the fringe of the forests, Naya saw motion begin. The elves that had come over to her, along with some small contingents of the army she split up in her distraction. And now they're right behind the humans, the whole right wing. The elves initiated the ambush with arrows, while the rest of her people began their long, loping runs. The arrows fell like a rain of steel into the midst of the far right. Paladins and squires fell, shock etched on their faces as they collapsed into the churned-up ruined earth and tried to see what had bitten them from behind. Wails of shock went up all along the right flank as the steel rain went on until the soldiers on foot crashed into the backs of those who could not fight both sides at once. Blader champions severed entire bodies apart at the waist, while ogres began to smash those who had become entangled with their own people and could neither advance nor retreat. Now. It's over. Naya nodded and closed her eyes. Press on, Albion. Press on, left and center, for the right has victory. Heartened by the cry, or horrified by it, the spirit of the humans began to break up. With nothing else to do, the Albion queened up toward the fighting of the left flank, barreling into a paladin and tearing out his throat, sending him gurgling and spasming on the ground. The fight was short and quick after that. The humans began to fragment, the right wing was demolished, and from there the whole line was rolled up as the victorious Albion demi-humans began to mass over the rear of the rest of the long line. And the trickle of a rout became a flood. Naya paid little mind to that. Whatever Halisha chose to do in pursuit of the finishing blow was an object lesson that in Naya's mind, they very much deserve everything they fucking get. The burned husks of the Spriggans turned into firewood remained foremost in her mind, and she let her demi-humans drive off the rest. Queen Kunkka sat on horseback beside Ines and watched Astraka form up. We're badly outnumbered. Is this really going to be easy? She asked, and Ines nodded along. You liked my little surprise with Gustav, didn't you, Kalka? he asked rhetorically, and she gave a rapid, enthusiastic nod. Magic like that, nobody could ever get the drop on us again. It was amazing, she said with a rapid bobbing of her head. Out in the field, some of her regal demeanor seemed to have relaxed. She rode closer to him, and as the battle loomed when Astraka's army was spotted, she remained even closer. She seemed only to be truly at ease when they were alone in the tent. Her body would relax, and she would lie on their field bed with him, holding her body against him as if in search of warmth, even if they were not mating, though why she was so ardent, she hadn't said, nor did he ask. The drums and fifes of the southern Holy Kingdom's nobles marked time for the opposing army as they lined up for the fight. They won't resist long, I promise you, he said to her, and Kalka tried to force a smile. I'm no coward, I won't run. But if I'm never in this position again for the rest of my life, I won't shed any tears over the bards not singing of my battlefield valor. She let out a little nervous laughter through trembling lips, but Ainz only winked at her. This won't be a battle. Or not much of one, he said. Go on, sound the advance and wait here. I will follow the bulk of the army, do my part, and let Gustav do the rest afterward. Gustav? She asked, and again he only winked at her. She sighed and turned to face the drummer. Go on, she commanded. The drums went up, their thunder from the ground outdoing any thunder to come from the sky, and the soldiers of the Kingdom of Nazarick, by all appearances ordinary humans, formed up in a single V formation with one champion at the front, a mere 100 men, began to march. At their right and left flanks were two long lines of 250 men each, all wearing runecraft armor and bearing runecraft weapons. Beyond them were squares of hundreds, a mix of paladins and squires bearing the common equipment of their station. Ainz waited, and began to follow behind the army, aligning himself with the V whose point was toward the southern Holy Kingdom's center. He cantered his horse forward and cast his first spell. Greater protection from arrows. This was a gamble, but from his recollections of Punatomo he guessed that the archers would target his center with the curious-looking soldiers and thin lines to create a breach. The steel rain came down from Duke Astraka's host, and hit the dome that was centered around Ainz, then bounced away, falling uselessly to the ground. Another flight, and another, and another. More feathers were in the air than in a flock of birds, and yet the falling rain of steel continued to be repelled. On the far wings, the cavalries began to charge, but his infantry and those of the Holy Queen ignored it and went forward. The horsemen would taunt one another for a time before engaging. Then the champion hit, clad in Yggdrasil gear, bearing a long bardiche. It was really just trash equipment, but the bright purple and red hues of his soldiers, whose looks suggested that they were merely for ceremony, quickly became a source of horror. This trash gear, drops from the days when the guild was made of level 60 members, might as well have been gifts of the gods. They began to rip through the center, sending bodies flying away with mass-enhanced strength, batting horses end over end as if they were merely kicking babies out of the way. The runecraft lines were the next to meet their marks, and though they didn't do the same, each man was worth 5 or 10 by comparison. What the hell is happening? Astraka cried in alarm as he watched a soldier sail overhead as if he'd been thrown by a giant. I don't know. One of his aides shouted with a cry of dismay. Another man went screaming overhead to land end over end, rolling like a stone until he stopped both moving and screaming after tumbling another 30 feet. What the hell is this? Astraka moaned. He saw the writing on the wall. Somehow, they brought something we never dreamed of to the fight. All the planning in the world, I could never win against this, not in 1,000 years. He yowled like a wounded cat in his mind as his soldiers' cries of pain were compounded more and more. It might be that mage. They have a caster in the back. If we target him, my lord. The aide cried out, his face drawn and eyes wild, his hand shaking as he pointed toward the robed mage on horseback. Fine. Signal the cavalry. Get them to target that man. It's the only chance. Astraka steeled his heart and put on his helmet. He grabbed his horse and mounted up. Have them follow me. If I fail, perhaps they'll succeed. He didn't wait for the aide to answer his orders, nor did he look back to see the flags waving and giving the signal to the cavalry to cease their skirmishing, nor did he stop to see that those were obeyed either. Astraka held out his lance and charged ahead. The thin lines of the soldiers in strange equipment had one weakness, and that was that they were thin, and thin lines naturally spread out as people found foes to fight. They separated, split. Damn him. Astraka cursed. He guessed that mage was the reason the arrows weren't working either. Can I get through with a horse? He wondered, but believed so as the infantry ahead of the mage seemed to be able to be engaged, if not killed. The thunder of the horse's hooves were heavy on the ground, a rolling thunder given by the earth under its hooves to warn anything in front of it to get out of the way. Even full-grown ogres could fall to the charge of an armored warhorse. Astraka narrowed his focus. He charged between the ranks of men on foot, avoiding coming within striking distance of their strangely effective weapons. A lifetime of training went into this, and he did his best. They raced past his vision as he went between them. Going around the V took a little longer, but after a brief and perfect loop, he was facing his enemy. Strangely, despite being mounted, the caster in the white robes did not run away. Instead, he dismounted from his horse. Is he going to cast a spell? No, it's fine, don't think about it. Astraka told himself and spurred his horse forward. Just get close enough to stab them and that's the end of any caster. He told himself, but the caster didn't seem inclined to run. Astraka gritted his teeth. The caster was truly massive, nigh 7 feet tall, and even more broad than he looked. Should have been a warrior. The passing thought came to mind, his lance lowered, aimed at the heart of his troubles. He shouted out a battle cry, for the Holy Kingdom. He sucked on his teeth, bracing himself for the impact. But there was none. Faster than his eye could truly see, his lance was battered aside as if it were nothing, and the hand of the caster came up. He had only a moment to realize what happened. As he tumbled forward, he saw that the caster had grabbed and held the throat of his horse. Not even 1 inch of ground was lost to the warhorse. No. It's not possible. Astraka's conscious mind told him as he sailed, flailing his limbs about end over end until he hit the ground and rolled into the grass of the battlefield a dozen feet from the caster who became the bane of his existence. Ein squeezed the throat of the warhorse. It tried to whinny, and couldn't. It tried to kick, but it couldn't rear up. His hands held it with ease. He squeezed, and held, and squeezed, until the animal fell with a thump at his feet. He turned around, walking toward the fallen man in the exquisite armor. Shockingly enough, the man was alive. The warrior, no, he must be a noble, the commander. Heinz realized. The commander was scrambling to his feet, reaching for his sword, breathing hard. Heinz raised his hand and leveled one finger toward the sword wielder. Mass Effect, Aura of Despair Level 1. He released the skill, and the aura began to emanate over the battlefield. Dark smoke rolled outward from his body like a plague, sweeping over man and beast. Cavalry that had been charging at him, froze, fell, and trembled with terror beyond all reason. Do you surrender? Heinz asked of the man in front of him. The sword fell from nerveless fingers. The body of the man who could only have been Duke Astraka shook like he was a child, afraid of the dark all over again, and he fell to his knees. The aura spread from person to person like an infection. Some few had courage enough to run for their lives, but most only froze and fell to their knees. I surrender, Duke Astraka said in a childish whimper. His was the most dignified of the lost. Across the field, others cast themselves in obedient positions, faces down into blood-slickened mud and begging for their lives. Far, far out of reach, more drums could be heard, and that, unless I miss my guess, would be Gustav. Heinz thought and breathed a sigh of relief that his prediction had been correct. Secure the prisoners, treat the wounded, and prepare to go home, Heinz shouted to the army of the Queen, and the cheers went up from one end of the field to the other. Volume 6 C45. The prisoners taken at the Second Battle of Kalincha were far more than Naya anticipated. Though the demi-humans hadn't much cared about human well-being or surrenders, the value of prisoners was something Naya emphasized often enough to keep them at least willing to capture the wounded as long as they didn't run. Every wagon in the city was confiscated, and more from the surrounding abandoned towns, all to send her captives back into her kingdom. But she did one more thing in secret. A single horse dispatching word to Hobans, to let the Holy Queen know that Remedios Custodia had been captured. If she's not willing to negotiate peace now, I will just have to burn down the whole damn kingdom. I really don't want to do that, but what else is there? Naya wondered. Astraka's alliance with her was one purely of convenience. His promises seemed genuine, but even if they were, would the Holy King Caspond keep those promises on the throne? She had no way to know for sure. And all things considered, she really did want what was best for her people. Even if she didn't always know what that meant, that makes her more reliable. As Naya contemplated this, she went to enjoy a feast, certain above all else, that at least now the war would take a predictable course. Kellett stood in front of the Holy Queen's throne. She declined to ever sit there, even if she was technically in charge while the Queen was away. Her eyes far too often turned to wondering how Our Lady was. Going after Astraka was a dangerous and bold move, which she made sure to spread word about. The Queen does not want to endanger the city. So she goes to fight the traitor herself and end this threat. It saw Kalka gaining new heights of popularity not seen since before the time of troubles had begun. A queen who put her body between danger and her people, that was what Kellett longed for them to see. That is what she is. That is why I love her so. She's that kind of woman. Not 6 times in 1,000 years do we get a monarch like that anywhere in the world. Her heart swelled again within her breast, and it held that great size until the moment the sweating, weary messenger rushed in without so much as a word or a gesture. He fell stumbling to Kellett's feet before the nobles and the throne and held up his scroll. Kalincha has fallen to the Queen of Frost. General Remedios Custodia has been captured. The Frost Queen sends terms of peace. He gasped out every word, struggling to breath. His fingers shook and the scroll with them in his unsteady hand. The army? Kellett forced herself to ask. Wiped out. I was one. What was not captured is dead or fled. She now has most of the east. He gulped several times, and Kellett's fingers trembled in horror as she accepted the scroll. She opened it, slowly, and found the ring Remedios wore, still on the severed finger. No. Kellett tried to deny it with a tiny word, but the ring and the finger it was on refused to disappear. The flesh was wrapped in a little preserving cloth, making it not only fresh, but it's still warm. If I remember my lessons, that means the body itself is still alive, but no healing spell has been cast on her. There was only one mad thing Kellett could think to do. She closed her eyes over the finger, and the scroll, and pointed to a series of nobles one right after the other. You 5 will run things as a council until the Queen returns. I have something I have to do. Kellett left the room without a word, shoving the letter and the finger into the hands of the nearest noble, who took a step back as it was pressed into his chest and he dropped with a gasp of disgust and horror. The finger rolled away a little until the signet ring came to a halt. Nobody moved to pick it up. Kellett went to her private quarters, where she kept all her mystical gear, her magic items, her scrolls, even a few expensive crystals. She threw on her rings, her cloak, a necklace with the fly spell, everything that enhanced her magic. She then raced to the private quarters of her queen. She'd been there often enough to know what she needed. The most important files of the kingdom were kept closely guarded. But with the queen's signet ring, she could access them with ease. The papers were where she knew they would be, a sealed box built into the floor, everything she had on the slain theocracy's involvement, orchestration of the conflict, and including their evident desire to use the demi-humans in their plans. My only hope is that she doesn't hate us yet. Kellett swallowed hard and took out a copy scroll. The blue flames went up over the stack, and each one became 2. She borrowed a small box, packed the copies, and returned the rest. She then rushed to the balcony her queen's room held, and whispered the command. Fly. A faint blue aura engulfed her as the necklace activated, and she shot up into the sky and began to head east. He must have run a horse or 2 to death to get to me, and then half run himself to death besides. But with flight magic, I can get there in hours, not days. Sister. Please. Please be all right. It was a bold move, a desperate move, and Kellett knew it. With Remedios captured, our army shattered, the wall and Kalincha taken, and her brother a hostage too. Even when she beats Astraka. What choice is there? But this one wants only one thing. My sister's life. A life that was bargained for already. The air was cold so high up, the world seemed so very small, the landscape raced underneath and every second seemed like an hour. Her teeth chattered, and as the necklace began to run out of mana, a crystal kicked in to boost it, holding Kellett aloft. So it went as she made her way to Kalincha. It was pitch black, curfew I suppose, assuming she hasn't just slaughtered everybody. Kellett reasoned, but as she descended, she noticed the lack of birds and the lack of the smell of decay, at least outside of the battlefield, where a handful of demi-humans were still at work digging graves for the nameless and numberless dead. Birds were still out picking at the feast of flesh that war had given them, and the smell of blood was thick in that area still. But Kellett had only one aim, where one light clearly shone, in the administrative center. And true to her hopes, the Queen of Frost made it easy to identify where she worked by virtue of having an oversized hole in the wall. She shot inside like she'd been launched from an arrow, landed, rolled and popped up to her feet only to see the Queen of Frost already springing up from behind the desk where she sat writing something. The Dragonid woman still had, to Kellet's surprise, some very human features. She still had hair, although it was whitish blue. She still had a human-shaped face, slender arms, strong legs, and she wasn't particularly tall. She even had a human woman's bosom still, and a human woman's curves, though neither were exceptional in terms of feminine charm. Her face, Kellet noted, was as fearsome as rumor said, and a murderous rage seemed to sit there at all times. The Dragonid opened her mouth and made ready to spring into attack. "Don't call the guards. I'm not here to fight," Kellet shouted, raising up her hands, and then falling to her knees. "I'm here to beg," she said, and the Dragonid stopped, her mouth closed. "Beg?" Naya asked, her brow furrowed. "Who are you? How did you even fly this far?" "My name is Kellet. Kellet Custodio. You have my older sister in your custody. Why you sent me her finger?" Kellet lowered her eyes and pressed her forehead to the ground. "Please give her back," she said as if asking the floor. "If you need revenge for what she did, and I know what she did, I am a Custodio. You can have my life in exchange. That should satisfy you, shouldn't it?" Kellet pleaded. Her brown hair tumbled over the floor, and she felt the staring ice-blue eyes fall over her. "Remedios' sister. Yes," Naya rubbed her chin thoughtfully. "Yes, I've heard of you. Supposedly you're a prodigy, even a genius mage, am I wrong? Personal advisor to the Queen, and rumors, well I'm sure you know those." "My sister." Kellet half choked out. Naya rubbed her forehead. "You are brave. You'd really offer your life for me to release her? I want that bitch dead for what she's done, and even if I were willing to accept your life in place of hers, that's just asking for trouble. I'd be much better off killing both of you and calling it a day." "You're bluffing." Kellet guessed, rose up to her knees to glare at the scaled body of the Dragonid Queen. "I am? Nobody has ever accused me of that before." Naya retorted and went to take the chair out from behind her desk. She flung it gently across the room. "You came all this way, you might as well sit to talk to me." Thank you," Kellet said with hesitation, and got up on shaky feet to seat herself in the chair. "Yes, you are bluffing. If you did that, I'm sure that your parents would be killed in retribution. You don't want that," Kellet pointed out. "They're humans. What makes you think I care about humans anymore?" Naya asked, keeping her face as straight as she could while she sat on her desk, crossed her arms, and studied the subject in front of her. "You allied with Astraka, meaning you listened to him rather than kill him outright. I don't believe you hate us all. And if I'm wrong?" Kellet said with confidence. She raised her chin to bare her throat. "Kill me right this second, but if not, about my sister." The moment hung. Naya clicked her talons together and then let out a sigh. "Fine, you're right. I don't hate all humans. Not that I like many of you anymore. This was my home once after all. But still," Naya insisted, "Remedios killed an envoy, an official party. And she was left alive. Maybe I could kill you instead, but more than that, Raven was my friend." Naya snarled and jammed her talons into the wood, gouging out chunks of the desk as she curled the talons into her fist. "He had a wife, and children, little girls. I spared his life for their sake and then—" Naya leveled the accusing finger at Kellet. "Your sister who you love so damn much, killed him. Killed him for being an orc. For daring to share the same world as her. He was there for peace. I wanted an end to all that strife. I could have forgiven what happened to me." Naya put her hand over her chest. "I am clearly better off for it, thanks to Olisur Dark. But your murderous bitch sister doesn't get to go off and live a happy life after what she did to my people. Killing you would only mean something if she felt guilty about it. But she won't, will she?" Naya demanded. No, she won't. She'll blame you," Kellet said with quiet resignation. "She never was one to accept responsibility for her own failings. She loves our queen, and me, and our country. She's not all bad. Tell that to Raven. Tell that to his children. Tell that to all my dead warriors," Naya hissed. "I have no intention of sparing your sister. and I won't accept your life in exchange for hers. It would be meaningless to me, and meaningless to her. I will let you go this one time, because of your courage, and because I can respect the compulsion of love to lay down your life for your friends. There's nothing I've ever found that is greater than that. But I can't just give you what you ask. Naya answered, and Kellet was quiet. What if Kellet finally said and reached into her pouch, "There is a lot more to all this than you know," she asked, and held the box out to the queen. "Do you really think the contents of this box will make a difference?" Naya asked with a frown and a doubtful look that seemed more confused than anything in Kellet's eyes. "That is for you to judge, Queen of Dim Albion," Kellet said. "I can only promise you that every word in there is absolutely true, on my life, my sister's life, my queen's life, and my future king's life. I swear I am not lying to you." "I will look, but I promise nothing," Naya answered and opened the box to find the stack of documents. "I ask nothing more," Kellet said, and folded her hands together to wait while the Queen of Frost began to read Volume 6 C46. It was a long, long night for Kellet. She felt trapped in the chair, watching Naya Baraha read through everything that implicated the slain theocracy and trying to instigate a civil war, and even used Remedios Custodio in order to start a fight between the three sides. When Naya set the last paper slowly back down into the box and sealed it up again, she sat staring at Kellet like the brown-haired caster had grown a second head. Even if all this is true, Remedios Custodio is still the one who made the choice, Naya pointed out. Nobody compelled her to do anything. "Yes, but my sister is an idiot," Kellet pointed out. "I love her, but she's a narcissistic, self-important, quick-tempered, brutish thug of an idiot." Naya cocked her head and reached behind her back to scratch the itch around her tailbone again. "That has got to be the strangest defense for anyone that I have ever heard in all my life." She snorted. "I don't doubt that it is true, mind you. But nonetheless, it is strange. Perhaps you're right, but still, it was her who did it." But with this information Kellet began to speak, but Naya raised a scaled hand to stop her. Holding her palm up, she shook her head. "We may have a common cause, but the fact of Remedios' actions cannot be overlooked. I am sorry, but she must pay for what she has done. What if she faces a different punishment? The Allfather of Nazarick promises one that he says will satisfy you, while also sparing both my queen and I the heartache of losing her," Kellet proposed, and that gave Naya pause. "You really believe he can make an offer like that? I've heard some things about him, some very interesting things. If you want the truth, I like what I've heard, but even if you say that, how can I know he will meet that standard?" Naya asked the question as if she were asking the time of day. Kellet, despite her circumstances, began to feel more at ease. At ease. And bold. "You can't, not unless you're willing to talk peace. You've won a great victory, Your Majesty. But I promise you if the Allfather turns his magic your way, all that you've accomplished will be erased," Kellet said with calm certainty, and it was enough to make Naya consider her words. "You will not see your sister leave here today. But I will. Hear from this Allfather myself. I will meet with your queen, the Allfather, and Astraca to negotiate an end to all this. But if it fails, do not forget we have many more prisoners of your side than you do of ours," Naya said with a long, deathly stare that drilled into Kellet's soul. "As a gesture of goodwill then, can you at least heal my sister? Her wounds, they must hurt," Kellet urged, her hands coming together, folding like a prayer. "So did mine, and she laughed when she shoved the third sword into my belly," Naya said with an icy hiss. "You've won your victory here, taken my family, the only family I've got. Please. You're a queen. Show your mercy. If you won't spare her life, then let me have her wounds instead. Let her time be without pain," Kellet pleaded, and Naya gave a deep sigh of exasperation. "There's no need for that. By the dead gods, if anyone hears this they'll think I've gone soft. I will have your sister healed. You've got the proof she's been captured, that's all we really needed. And I will tell her that her wounds are healed out of respect for her sister's courage. Now unless there is more? Get out of my city, we'll settle on an exact location and meet in 2 weeks' time. Until then, I promise on my name that we have a truce." Kellet rose to her feet, bowed, and left the way she came, a little more hopeful than when her day began. It was 2 days later when, prisoners in tow, and to the cheers of the population, the Queen, King, and General Montagnier entered the city with their thousands upon thousands of Southern Holy Kingdom prisoners. Kellett, for her part, waited patiently in the throne room, a smile on her face and already down on one knee in front of the throne to await the chance to personally welcome them back. The fanfare was at least audible from where she waited, and in her mind's eye she could see the people cheering her on, restoring to the heart of the Queen something of what she had lost when first forced to flee her own capital. The purging of the corrupt, the disposal of the old nobles, standing in between her city and an army coming to take it, these things made all the cheers, as far as Kellett could tell, genuine and warm. And so, despite her less than completely successful meeting with the Queen of Frost, those small successes and the cheers she now heard, restored her as well. When the Queen finally entered the throne room, it was like seeing her again for the first time. Kalka's face was radiant, a joyful smile on her face, her arms open as if to embrace each and every noble and servant present like they were long-missed family. "Rise, rise, Kellett. We won. We won stupendously. Marvelously. It wasn't even a battle." She went on, rushing ahead of Ines to go and embrace her closest confidant. The two clasped biceps and kissed one another's cheeks in welcome, each one's hands squeezing a little more tightly than might have been proper, but which each person politely ignored, at least in public. "I knew you would, Your Majesties, but I have news. Please, may we speak privately?" Kellett asked. Her bright toothy smile faded away to show the gravity of the matter, and with Kellett's fading smile, Kalka's faded as well. "Private council chamber, now," Kalka commanded, and without running, but still at a swift pace, her seemingly tireless feet went straight toward the way out of the public eye. Ines pursed his lips and followed the two. Kellett held the door to the council chamber open a moment later, waiting for Ines to enter before closing and locking it against intrusion. "Now, what happened?" Kalka asked, and then her face went pale as she learned of the Frost Queen's destruction of the vast majority of the Eastern Army, the fall of Kalincha, and the capture of Remedios Custodio. But when Kellett described her actually going to Kalincha, Kalka shot to her feet, whirled on the woman, and slapped her hard across the face. Kellett held the site where her queen struck, her eyes wide up at Kalka, who shouted, "How could you risk yourself like that? Are you insane? Did you lose all reason?" "She is my sister," Kellett cried out, rubbing the reddening cheek and almost wilting under her queen's angry eyes. And your Kalka stifled what she was about to shout and replaced it with, "And I could have lost both of you. What if she had chosen to kill you both? What if she had chosen to hold you both hostage?" "But she didn't," Kellett exclaimed at the furious and focused queen, whose bright eyes were like steel digging into the younger Custodio's heart. "I've given up enough over the years without doing anything about it. I couldn't just let her stay there, wounded, bleeding, missing her fingers and who knows what else, and just do nothing. So I took a chance. I know, Your Majesty. I shouldn't have. I know you would have forbidden it. But she's my only sister. Despite everything, I couldn't leave her like she was." Kalka's heart broke under the wilting face of her advisor. Her hand came out again, and gently moved aside the one that rubbed her cheek. "My Kellett. I'm sorry. What do me humans have done to humans? And if they had both of you? I'd never get over it. I know it's selfish, and I'm sorry for my reaction. But you can't risk yourself like that. So many have already died, and what you did was nearly suicide," Kalka said, and gently stroked the place where her palm print now showed. "My queen. My." She looked over to Ines, as did Kalka, and when he gave a quiet subtle nod and looked away, Kellett stood and leaned close to whisper, "My Kalka. You'd have done it for me, I had to do it for her." Ines cleared his throat a few moments later, ignoring what went on in the semblance of privacy, and waited until he heard them reclaim their seats. "So now she hasn't moved her armies and offers peace talks. Obviously she doesn't know that Astraka is a prisoner, but that will be a helpful surprise," Ines pointed out, and neither one opposed what he said. "Does anyone oppose negotiations?" Ines asked the question more or less rhetorically, and true to his expectations, they both answered, "No." "Then we make arrangements, and settle this once and for all," Ines replied at once. "Agreed," Kalka said, and slumped in her chair. Her ease with them was open and her sigh both heavy and relieved at once. "I just want this to be over. To get back to a time of peace again. I believe we all share that desire. And perhaps one figure's presence might help that process along." Ines asserted, but met their questioning looks only with enigmatic silence. "All right, keep your secrets," the two women said at once. "Again," Kalka added, and let out a little silvery laugh that sparked a smile on Ines' previously even expression. Volume 6 C47. A week and a half of negotiations back and forth led to a final decision on a precise destination. An open field between Hobans and Kalinshire, exactly halfway there, with each side providing seating enough for the other as a trivial act of good faith. Is it really a good idea to bring her parents? She might not react well, Kalka asked of her husband Shubi. If she falls apart over their presence, this won't work anyway, Ines suggested, and then added with a raised finger, and it shows that they were well treated. We will be acting in good faith to show that for fact, letting her see and speak with them. Maybe so. Kalka paced the bedroom a bit. I never liked holding them hostage anyway, it felt so criminal, degrading, underhanded even. I suppose, but that is how politics works. I've had to tell myself that many times since I ascended the throne, and, he chortled a little, I'm glad I still don't like it. Kalka put her arm around his waist and stilled her pacing. Me too. But really, Dragonback. Trust me, Ines said again with an enigmatic smile down at the slender queen. All right. I've never flown before, she reminded him. The tricky part is not falling, he pointed out, and she laughed while shaking her head. At least people can laugh at my jokes. Nobody laughed when I was undead, he thought with relief, and they made their way outside. The carriage holding most of their delegation had gone out days before, taking their time while Ines waited on his chosen conveyance, and now it was here, and it was time to go. They made their way outside to find a fit, robust young frost dragon. I'm ready to go, my lord, Heginmal said while practically pawing at the ground. Thanks to Aura's help, he was now in much better shape than before, and even enjoyed flying as a dragon should have. Ines put his hands around Kalka's waist and lifted her to sit just behind his neck, her hands darting over his for a moment, but not offering resistance before he got behind her himself. Warn a lady next time, she said, but then grabbed his wrists to hold on for dear life, tensing as she was about to fly. My apologies, it was just clear that you needed help, Ines replied and bowed his head behind her, bopping the top of hers just a tiny bit with the base of his chin. Heginmal, let's go, Ines commanded before she could retort, and the wings sprang out, beat, and the dragon began to ascend. Kalka was glad she chose her warskirt for the journey, given how she straddled the neck of the dragon, her breath caught in her lungs as she watched the ground grow larger and the people grow smaller down below. The appearance of the small dragon caused consternation amidst people when it first arrived, even forewarned, the gasps, oohs, and ahs, and the occasional scream of alarm as it swept in low toward the city, were just a further testament to the power of the monarch they were now joined to, and anticipation for the marital date between the two grew ever greater. Kalka began to squeal like an excited child receiving a long-awaited gift as the dragon began to accelerate. Her hair lifted and flew behind her, and she let go of Ines's hands to grab onto the ridges along Heginmal's neck and lowered herself as if to pilot him. This is the best thing ever, she shouted as the dragon began to speed up. She shrieked with happiness as she watched the world race beneath her, moving past with the speed of a crossbow bolt. Over a day of riding even with enchanted beasts was accomplished in not even a quarter of the time. The carriage Ines dispatched previously was spotted on the long road below, and up ahead they saw the meeting place, and ahead, in the air, a distant, very large dot, a dot that began to descend almost at the same time Heginmal did. We're nearly there, my lord, my lady, Heginmal shouted over his shoulder, and his speed began to slow. Take your time, we should arrive when they do, and I believe we're a little ahead, Ines said and patted the hard blue scales. At your command, my lord, Heginmal answered, and obeyed. True to his expectation, the two began to descend on the agreed-upon place almost in the same minute. Both, however, focused so much on landing properly that neither looked up until they had. It was Olisar Dark that did first. Heginmal? He shouted, his neck bending up as the Queen of Frost dismounted from his body. You know this one? Naya asked, putting her hand on his neck while Ines and Kalka dismounted as well. Father? Heginmal shouted back, his neck arched the same as his father's did as he realized who spoke with him. Father? I thought your family was dead? Naya exclaimed. Dead? Hejinmal asked. I thought they were. How could anyone have survived Yaldabaoth? Olisur stammered the question, and Hejinmal's tense body relaxed. Through this one's power, Hejinmal said and pointed a claw at Ainz. Naya looked at Ainz with narrow, doubtful eyes, but without asking any questions, Hejinmal began to answer them. He told his father everything, from start to finish, up to and including the final battle at the Great Rift. In turn, Olisur spoke of what happened after his crash landing in the Holy Kingdom, the human who tended him, her near death, his rescue and how he saved her life, and pointed out Naya beside him. So you actually made friends with a human? Hejinmal asked. I think of her as more like a pesky little sister. Olisur said with a wry, deep chuckle that made Naya cross her arms and huff. I didn't expect to be part of a family reunion today, Naya said with a roll of her eyes. Still, she looked up at the dragon. I'm glad for my big brother here. Thank you for saving his family, Allfather Ainz Gaun, Naya said and gave him a bow of her head. It seems that it goes both ways. You saved the patriarch of my servant's family. At great risk to yourself. Ainz offered out his praise freely, but Naya gave it a hand wave aside. First I helped him because he was in a state of weakness, he needed it, and helping the weak is just good sense. Then, it was because he was my friend, just like with Teraven, when you love your friends, you lay down your life for them, that is the highest devotion of all. It's the same reason I made myself queen. They're my friends, or my friends' children, and making things safe for them is what a ruler is supposed to do. Or am I wrong? Naya asked, her face briefly wistful when she rubbed the neck of the dragon beside her. Ain's eyes widened as she thoughtlessly quoted his guild, himself, and one of his oldest friends as if they were known to her. Despite her face, his affection meter began to max out. No, you are not wrong. Queen of Frost Naya Baraha, he said from across the open space between them. I'm glad we agree. Allfather Ainz Gaun. But please, my title is a long one. Since we're supposed to make peace, why don't you just call me Naya until we decide whether or not we're enemies? Then, you should also call me Ainz, he said, and this, he gestured to the Holy Queen, I'm sure you know, is Kalka Besseres. Your Majesty. Naya inclined her head with a polite bow. Given the situation, call me Kalka also. And for what it is worth, I say again, I am sorry. Naya shrugged off the apology. Your reputation is that you wanted to be a good queen. There are worse ambitions. I know about you, from your records, sent to die, an outcast. We checked with your old comrades. And they didn't see you as one. My country, your country, wasn't kind to you, and I am sorry for that too. The queen said with a bitter frown on her face. A village embraces a child, or the child burns it down to feel its warmth. Naya replied and continued to idly stroke the neck of Olisur. Maybe that is what we have here. I had nowhere else to go and now. Here we are. But I also know the rest of it, the slain theocracy, their conspiracies and attempts to use us both. Naya fell silent as the noise of carriages approached. Servants disembarked from both sides, rushing over with a half-table each, and chairs enough for them all. As they worked, Naya said, I hate to ask, but I sent word to Astrika already, and have not heard back. Still he should have gotten my message by now. If necessary, could we wait a day or two? He is here. He was defeated at the Battle of Western Hobans, and is now a captive, Ainz said, and Kalka pointed to the carriage where Kellet emerged, holding a chain that secured 3 people at the wrists. Astrika, and Naya's parents. Her eyes narrowed. You beat him. Fine. That changes very little. But you also bring out my parents. To what? Torment me? She hissed. Kalka answered by walking over to Kellet, and holding out a hand after a few whispered words, accepting a key. The Holy Queen went to the 2 paladins and unlocked their manacles. Go, she said, go to your daughter. The golden-haired Holy Queen waited while they stared at her and rubbed their wrists. What are you waiting for? I said go, Kalka said again and pointed over to Naya. Naya looked at them both, her wings out. She touched her horns as they came closer, small steps, hesitant at first. Mother. Father. I know I look different, Naya said and ran her fingers along the horns and over her almost imperceptibly scaled face, but it's me. It really is, it's Naya. Her eyes welled up. Is it? I heard but. Her father whispered, but Naya began to speak. You came to me in the prison, 2 years ago. You flung your arms through the bars and I held you through them. You told me you loved me, and it was the first time you ever said it. It was the happiest day of my life. And when I was being executed, while I was screaming and Remedios Custodio was shoving the swords into my body, you fought to get to me, to try to save me. It is you. Her mother whispered, and like that the dam burst and they rushed across the space between. Her father and mother embraced her, wings and all. Whatever you are, you're ours first. Her mother kissed her daughter's cool scaled cheeks, and her father the top of her head. Naya squeezed them both until she felt them wince. I wasn't sure what you'd say. I'm an animal now in this country's eyes, or a monster to be put down. I wasn't sure how you'd answer. I'm so glad. She buried her head in between them, and they kindly ignored the light poking of her horns when she did. The laws are changing, Kalka said while that went on. Part of my marriage to the Allfather. By his laws, all non-humans are considered lawful citizens, equal in the eyes of the crown. Our nations will be one. We will be his people, and his people will be mine. Naya stepped back from her parents and looked at both the Holy Queen and the Allfather with new respect. She touched her parents' shoulders and said, "Please, step aside, I have to work now, but if you want to stay with me, I will make sure you live comfortably in my new homeland." They nodded quietly and moved aside, letting lingering touches fall on her body and trail away till they could move to her side of the circle. That is heartening. Naya wiped her eyes. Her fangs did nothing to make her appear friendlier, but there is more. As you know, I have captured Remedios Custodio, and I intend to behead her for her crime and put her head on the wall where she tried to kill me. But Kellett, Naya gestured to the woman who stood aside, holding Astraca's chain while the sullen Duke looked on, a spectator who thought not that long ago believed he would be participating, says you can do better. Naya sat at the small round table in the middle of the open space, using a chair provided by the Holy Kingdom, while Kalka sat at a chair provided by Di Malbian. Ines did not sit, instead he crossed from one side to the other. The condition is that she lives, and not be tortured, however. Ines came closer, and Naya tensed. May I? He asked. She nodded with some reticence, and he leaned in to whisper. As he did, she kept bobbing her head in agreement, and when he finished, her face was completely neutral, but she said at once. His Majesty. Ine's solution is agreeable. I will turn her over to the Allfather, assuming we can agree to all else. Naya agreed, and when Ines went to Kalka and sat beside her, she looked up at him with curious eyes. It's only as bad as she makes it for herself, he said, and left it at that. Now, my ally, Duke Astraca, what do you plan to do with him? Naya asked. The normal penalty for treason is death on the wall. Kalka replied. You don't have a wall. Naya pointed out. You don't intend to give it back? Kalka replied. After killing Remedios on it, I plan to dismantle it. As she is going with the Allfather, I will jump straight to that. I will utterly destroy the border wall, down to the last brick. It's good building material. I could use that, Naya said with a pragmatic, confident smile on her face that made her wings shiver with Kalka's consternation. We have many prisoners, Naya said matter-of-factly, including many nobles. Exile Astraca to my country is a penalty, along with his family, assuming your brother is unharmed, and I will return those nobles in a fortnight. Kalka pursed her lips. He takes nothing with him. Not even the family crest. They will be erased here. Only essential travel items and personal effects, nothing significant to their house or history, no weapons, insignias, or banners. He and his family come to me as poor travelers, refugees. Naya offered. Agreed, Kalka said at once. But what about the many other prisoners you've taken? If you are willing to feed them on the return trip, I will let all of those who want to go, come home. Take your time about it, months if needed. Naya suggested, then began tapping a talon on the wooden table, but don't be surprised if some of them refuse. I have a lot of open land, and even with the elves, I still haven't got enough for it all. Some of the humans might want to remain to farm or work. I've had them treated as well as I could under the circumstances. I can't say how many people that will matter to. Kalka's mouth shut tight for a moment and she looked up to her future husband. And the matter of the theocracy? She asked, since you know everything? They're going to be a problem for me, I am willing to engage in an alliance against them if necessary, on one condition, Naya insisted: free trade and free movement across borders, and that we have suitable reparations for the harm your servant did by causing this war. The care of your captured population was costly, even if we had use for them, and your war set me back years. You pillaged our dead, did you not? Kalka remarked with frosty blue eyes. Surely the weapons and armor they carried was enough. Naya thought that over. Fine, deduct that from the cost of feeding our captives, and, she sighed, fine, exclusive rights beside the crown to buy from the old Wenmark mines. I understand those were profitable, and we will pay fair market price. We need minerals while we get our own mines going in earnest, and that should be enough. Kalka thought that over, and then answered, agreed. We'll have prisoners enough to do that labor for some time. We'll sell you whatever we don't need, on the condition that no demi-human under arms comes over our border, and that we get the right to try them if any crimes are committed. As long as we get the same consideration regarding humans. Naya answered instantly. Agreed. Kalka answered. The negotiations went on for some time beyond that, and more than once, Ainz was frankly bored, but when the sun finally was starting to set, 3 copies of an elaborate treaty were written, read over, and provided to each country in their own written language, and signed by all 3 nations. Will you have a hard time settling things in the south, Kalka? Naya asked. No, Astraca was the driving force. With our war with you over, we have paladins, and you know better than anyone here that no other force in the nation can stand up to those. Their household troops and militia are no match for us. I should have the whole matter settled in a few weeks. Chances are they will surrender outright when I bring 50,000 veteran paladins to the gates of Yanana, and then one brief appearance per city. There may be some fighting, but with that marvelous runecraft equipment, we can't lose. Kalka had a healthy smile on her face, but the Queen of Frost looked at her cockeyed. Runecraft? She asked. Ainz snapped to attention when the opportunity presented itself. A marvelous cost-free form of enchantment, all it takes is time. Naya looked at him with renewed interest. Is that so? And it works with any weapon? She asked, and he saw the hint of greed in her eyes that he'd seen on many clients who smelled opportunity. Yes, I understand you were an archer, but I don't see a bow. Ainz pointed out with a half-rhetorical question. Naya let out a regretful sigh. It was broken at the Second Battle of Kalincha, another thing I owe Remedios for. I see, Ainz said, then. As a token of friendship, let me offer you something to mark the new peace between us all, and the profitable trade relations I'm sure will come between us all. He reached into empty space, and before all sets of wide-staring eyes, he pulled out a marvelous bow, bones of some once majestic beast, inlaid with gold and runes that though barely visible to the naked eye, coursed with power. This is called the Ultimate Shooting Star Super. A gift from my kingdom, to yours. Naya stretched out her trembling hand, the bow pulsed with, she almost thought power, but it was more destiny. She thought. Every inch of her longed to shoot it. This is the most beautiful thing I've seen in my life. She gasped. I can feel it. It calls to me. Like I was meant to bear this bow. She looked at Ainz with focused, certain eyes. The terror she normally projected was turned to a detailed study of the towering human king. You are no ordinary man. Don't ask me how I know. Maybe we knew each other in another life, maybe many, but somehow, I know there is far more to you than even what I am seeing here. Come to my country when my capital is built. Let me call you guest, let me call you friend, and let me repay you for this wonderful gift. Ainz was briefly taken aback by her intensity, and he held down the sigh of relief that he was sitting. I would be pleased to do so. I admit. This is all beyond my expectations. Had we not fallen to fighting, perhaps we could have been friendly from the start. Ainz pointed out. Naya and Kalka gave dissatisfied grunts. We have the slain theocracy to thank for that, they said at once, and eyes popped open to stare at one another briefly across the table. We will show our thanks to them one day. The Queen of Frost replied, and stood from the table as the last of the daytime sun died on the horizon, bathing them in the last of its orange glow. The Allfather and the Holy Queen rose in turn with her, and each holding their copies of the treaty in hand, they crossed to the middle, and shook hands. I think I speak for both of us, Ainz said as Kalka and Naya broke their handshake, when I say that we will be watching your rule with great interest, Naya. I look forward to showing you what we can do and Thank you for returning my parents. I feared what you might demand for them. Naya added. We got what we wanted already, an end to the fighting, and your friendship. Ainz replied, and Naya chuckled at him. I had to lose my humanity to find comrades and friends, and now the two humans I fought against, I find I'm friends with. This is the strangest of worlds, but I wish you both well in it. She looked over to Astrika, her ally, and inclined her head. A good life awaits you when you return to me. Naya Baraha repays her debts. Olisurdark looked down at the Queen of Frost and said, I'd like to remain here, to catch up with my son. Naya answered promptly, of course, I'm sorry you ended up on opposite sides, even without knowing it. I can fly back to Kalinsha and arrange things on my own, just bring my parents with you when you come back. We're going to ride a dragon, Pabel stammered. Only once. As a favor to her. Olisurdark pointed out, but neither one was about to complain. Naya turned once more to the pair, Ainz, Kalka, we'll meet again, and without any hostility next time. There is a saying from a vanished people in a vanished world, Ainz added, and when both women looked to him he said, after the war, make alliances. The war is over, I have given you a weapon, that token should mark the end of the old ways, and the beginning of something new. I don't know what lies ahead, but at least we have some of the same hopes. Peace and safety for my friends and my people, on her side of the wall when I lived there, on the other side when I went over there, and now both. Good luck, all of you, next time we meet. May more beer than blood flow. The trio waved and traded the promise, and Naya's wings popped wide, beat, and took her off into the air again, back the way she'd come. That went better than I expected. Kalka replied, I didn't think I'd like her, she seemed so familiar somehow. And I'm glad we met her, even if I didn't care for the situation. Ainz put a hand on her shoulder, it is funny that way, but as am I. We should return to Hoban soon, the carriage should hold us all. Sire? Heginmal asked. Speak with your father if you wish, then return home to Nazarick. You can arrange a larger reunion later. Ainz gave the order, and Heginmal bowed his head down to the ground. Thank you, my lord. The young frost dragon replied, and with that Ainz, Kalka, Kellet, and Astrika returned to the carriage again, and turned it around for the journey back again.